The story of the Prophet Muhammad begins before his birth with a series of prophecies and miracles. Orphaned merchant in the middle of the Arabian desert that basically alters the course of human history. How does this person with no formal education, no army, no political power, ends up founding one of the great religions of the world? The Prophet Muhammad's mother, during her pregnancy, extraordinary signs marked the impending birth of a remarkable figure, symbolizing this spiritual illumination that her son would bring into the world. The Cave of Hira. It was there that one of the most significant turning points in human history unfolded, when silence broke to revelation. So, all that to say, this is another attempt in me to dive deeper in my understanding about what it really means to be a Muslim. And there's no better place to dig into than the life of the Prophet, yes, that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So, I'm also going to say this, I'm not going to say peace be upon him for the whole time, okay? I just can't. Just for the interest of flow and expedience, I'm just going to give it one big piece up top. You know how I feel.
The whole episode where you did it every single time, so you're compensating.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, it feels try-hard. So I'm just going to give one big old piece, all right? Shout out to the Prophet. Shout out to the Muslims out there watching. And from henceforth, it will be either just the Prophet or Muhammad. So this is a fascinating human being, right? I mean, basically, all I knew prior to this was that you have this illiterate, orphaned merchant in the middle of the Arabian desert that basically alters the course of human history. How does this person with no formal education, no army, no political power, ends up founding one of the great religions of the world?
Roman state is a Christian nation, and there's no cultural power that's really, comparing to what the Christians are rocking with. That was until it was challenged by one of the most potent religious, political, and cultural forces known to history, Islam. And it all started with one man, the Prophet Muhammad, who was, according to, Muslim belief, the final and greatest of God's prophets on earth. So you've probably never seen an image of him, and you've almost certainly met someone who's been named after him, as today Muhammad is actually the most popular name given on the planet, basically. I mean, yeah, it's like number one, which I always found funny that Muhammad's the most popular name in the world, and I think Wang is the most popular last name. I have a theory on that, by the way, but there's no Muhammad Wangs. It's kind of strange, right? Sure. Wait, what's your theory on Wang? Now, my theory on Muhammad is that a lot of times it's first and last name, so it counts twice, which is why it's the most popular. That's a good point. I like that. So this is one of the most popular names that's passed out. And in today's episode, we're going to go through his whole life. So let's go to the birth of the Prophet. Much like Jesus and, Siddhartha, the story of the Prophet Muhammad begins before his birth, with a series of prophecies and miracles. Arabia at this time was a home to diverse peoples, clans, cultures, all filled deserts and, towns nearby. Mecca, the birthplace of Muhammad, was a sanctuary, which attracted pilgrims from across the region where, various tribes worshipped an array of idols and they practiced polytheism. If you don't know what polytheism, this is the worship of multiple gods. Much of Arabia at this time was characterized by what historians would call the Jahiliyyah period, which is the age of ignorance, mostly because there was an absence of a monotheistic religious framework to basically unify the region, but also because of the prevalence of this idol worship and tribal feuding and a lot of, social issues that were existing in the region. This region, matter of fact, was controlled by the Quraysh. This is a dominant tribe in Mecca at the time of the Prophet's birth, and they looked after the Kaaba, which gave them both religious influence and economic power, as pilgrims from across Arabia came to the city. The Prophet Muhammad was born into one of its respected clans, the Banu Hashim. Although his family was not among the wealthiest of the clan by any stretch, it's important to remember that the Quraysh, as they played a central role in both his early protection, but also later his opposition. But Arabia was not completely isolated from other faiths. Christianity and Judaism were actually present and interacted with some Arab tribes. There was also a looming expectation, a religious anticipation that some great prophet would soon arise to restore true monotheism to the land. And this is where we are introduced to Amina bint Wahab. This is the Prophet Muhammad's mother. Islamic tradition recounts that during her pregnancy, extraordinary signs marked the impending birth of a remarkable figure. One of the most well-known stories tells of a light radiating from Amina's womb. This light was so intense that it illuminated the household and nearby surroundings, symbolizing this spiritual illumination that her son would bring into the world. And Amina herself reportedly experienced these, sort of auspicious dreams, as did many people that she knew. These dreams, often featured stars and these radiant figures, almost like these angelic beings, and other symbols of great significance. And the glowing lights and, the dreams were interpreted by the community as confirmation that some type of divine plan may be unfolding. So 570 CE or AD, the Prophet Muhammad was born, and this is the year of the elephant. An event, recorded in multiple early sources and celebrated within Islamic tradition. This year was named after this extraordinary episode when Abraha, the Christian ruler of Yemen, led an army that included elephants to attack Mecca and destroy the Kaaba, which, if you don't know what the Kaaba is, I have a video on it where I go through the entire history of the Kaaba that I would recommend you check out. But at this point, the Kaaba was basically, you could say being desecrated and used as a polytheistic worshiping site, that many different pagans in the region were utilizing, which Muhammad would later come in to restore. So back to Abraha, he basically sends this attack to Mecca, and this turned out to be a massive mistake. According to the tradition, the attack was miraculously repelled by divine intervention. Flocks of birds, known as ababil, appeared, pelting the invading army with stones and forcing their retreat. Mecca was under this divine protection, and people were convinced that special things were right about to happen. So Muhammad may be the most popular name given today, but it certainly was not at the time that he was born. It meant, quote, the praised one, a rare name that was not chosen by his father, who had already passed, but instead by his grandfather. When asked why he chose it, he basically just said, so he may be praised in the heavens and on earth. Much like many other religious leaders, great expectations were placed on his very, young shoulders. So at 6 years old, Muhammad lost a parent for the second time. Amina's death came suddenly during a journey to the Yatrib, later Medina, which would be, significant later on in the story. And this is where she had taken a young Muhammad to visit his maternal relatives. On the return journey, somewhere in the barren flatlands of Abwa, she fell ill and passed away. First, he was taken in by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, who was already an old man by then. He held the boy in high regard, so much so that young Muhammad was given access to the place of honor under the Kaaba's shade, a spot typically only reserved for elders. But tragedy continued to plague Muhammad's early life. 2 years later, his grandfather too passed away, now in the care of his uncle Abu Talib, who was actually a gifted poet and, a very kind man, but not wealthy in any capacity. Muhammad would grow up in pretty modest means. No, fine robes or gold or servants or any of that stuff. He tended sheep in the hills of Mecca. It's interesting how the divine often brings with pastoral settings, even with other, Abrahamic prophets. from Abraham himself to Moses, David, and also in Islam with the Prophet Muhammad. This image of, the shepherd is it's inseparable from the divine. I mean, Christ is, the shepherd of men that tends to his flock. It's just interesting that, across all these different Abrahamic religions, the idea of the shepherd was, so pervasive. I wonder if just in the region that, that these ideas were kind of percolating, if that was the most common job, or if that was just something that, if it was useful for the metaphor. I don't know. That's an interesting thing that, I'm thinking about. So he's in the hills of Mecca, tending to his flock. And those hills eventually become, in a metaphorical sense, a teacher for Muhammad in a lot of different ways. I mean, long walks in silence gives him all sorts of time to kind of think. And it was there that he built this sort of calm and, considerate temperament that would later help him, as we'll see. And away from the bustle of the cares market and its rising material, ideas, he seemed to develop a quiet but sort of wise and almost soft-spoken character. His temperament was gentle but firm, observant but not withdrawn necessarily. And most importantly, he listened far more than he ever spoke. This wisdom earned him the nickname Al-Amin, the trustworthy. Not for, grand gestures, but because he simply never lied. In a society of, complex alliances and rivalries and status games, he just had a simplicity about him that was, almost unsettling to some people and earned him this, respect from others. Even Gandhi described Muhammad's rigid simplicity as the reason